Good morning, and let me begin with a statement that might genuinely catch you off guard. The 10-year stretch from age 65 to 75 is far from the serene, golden chapter that retirement pamphlets have painted for you. According to a pivotal longitudinal investigation carried out by the National Institute on Aging, which followed over 14,000 American adults across two full decades, this specific 10-year period stands out as the single most biologically volatile phase of the entire human lifespan. It is more disruptive to your physical system than adolescence, more threatening to your self-sufficiency than your 80s, and more impactful on your overall well-being than nearly any other decade you will ever experience. And the unsettling truth is that the vast majority of people have no clue it is unfolding until the point of no return has already passed. I am Dr. Mandell, and for more than 30 years, I have worked intimately with patients navigating this exact age bracket. I have observed some flourish gracefully into their 90s, mentally sharp, physically robust, and entirely self-reliant, while others deteriorated rapidly within just a handful of years after stepping away from their careers. And I can state with complete confidence that the dividing line between these two groups was almost never a matter of genetic luck. It came down to what they understood, and more critically, what they chose to do with that understanding. Today, I am going to guide you through the 5 most compelling reasons why the ages of 65 to 75 represent the most demanding season of life, and even more importantly, I will lay out actionable steps you can take to address each one. The second point on our agenda today involves a process occurring deep within your cells, something your primary care physician has almost certainly never brought up in conversation. It is the quiet culprit behind persistent fatigue, mental haze, and diminishing muscle strength, and once you grasp this concept, the entire puzzle of aging begins to fall into place. But before we proceed, I want to pose a direct question to you. Please take a moment to drop a comment below sharing your current age and one aspect of your health that you would genuinely love to transform right now. Perhaps it is your energy levels, your memory, your physical power, your sleep quality, or something entirely different. I make it a point to read every single response that comes in, and your input may very well influence the topics I tackle in future videos. Now let us jump straight into the heart of the matter. The fifth reason on our list, and one that hardly anyone addresses openly, is what researchers at the Mayo Clinic have labeled the retirement identity collapse. It may sound like a psychological catchphrase, but the physiological repercussions are profoundly tangible and deeply damaging. When you exit the workforce, when your children have flown the nest, and when the social framework that sustained your professional life quietly evaporates, your brain undergoes a measurable neurochemical transformation. A study featured in the Journal of Aging and Health that followed over 5,500 men and women between the ages of 65 and 73 revealed that within a mere 2 years of retirement, participants exhibited a 40% surge in depressive symptoms and a 25% drop in cognitive performance on standardized memory evaluations. 25% in just 24 months. Now let me explain why this phenomenon is so uniquely tied to the 65 to 75 window. Consider your brain as you would a muscle. Throughout your career, your brain was being exercised relentlessly. Deadlines, interpersonal negotiations, troubleshooting, steering through intricate relationships and obligations. It was subjected to beneficial stress day in and day out. Then, abruptly, that pressure vanishes almost completely. And much like a muscle that is no longer pushed to perform, the brain begins to wither. What neuroscientists refer to as synaptic pruning speeds up dramatically. Your brain essentially begins dismantling neural pathways it deems surplus to requirements. The scientific term for this is use-dependent plasticity, which simply means that your brain is molded by the frequency and intensity with which you engage it. Cease using it at the same level, and its architecture shifts accordingly. I recall a patient named Walter, 68 years old, hailing from Columbus, Ohio. He had served as an engineering manager for 35 years, astute, disciplined, and painstakingly thorough. He retired at 65, and within 18 months his wife called my office nearly in tears because the man she described sounded like a complete stranger. Forgetful, withdrawn, sleeping 12 hours a day, and showing little interest in anything around him. Walter had not developed dementia. Walter was enduring a textbook case of retirement identity collapse, exacerbated by the abrupt removal of cognitive challenges. We designed a structured regimen for Walter centered on purposeful education, volunteer mentoring, and social accountability. Within 8 months, his cognitive assessment scores had rebounded by nearly 30%, and his wife shared with me that she finally felt like she had her husband back. The practical lesson here is non-negotiable. You must deliberately replace the cognitive and social structure of your working years with something intentional and demanding before you retire, not after you begin to notice decline. Take up a new skill that genuinely frustrates you at the outset. Think language acquisition, learning a musical instrument, or immersing yourself in complex strategy games. Join communities that require you to show up, participate actively, and remain answerable to others. Volunteer in a role that leverages the expertise you have cultivated over decades. And weave daily physical movement into this plan, because research from Stanford University confirms that aerobic exercise directly boosts the production of BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which functions essentially as fertilizer for your brain. You cannot effectively tackle reason number 5 without incorporating movement, and we will revisit this connection several more times throughout today's discussion. The fourth reason on our list is one that I see erode quality of life faster than nearly anything else in my clinical practice. It is the deterioration of what scientists call anabolic sensitivity. Let me break that down in straightforward language, because this concept is absolutely vital. In your 30s, 40s, and even your 50s, when you consumed protein, your muscles responded by repairing and growing. That process is known as muscle protein synthesis, and it is the biological engine that keeps you strong, steady, and self-sufficient. However, here is what unfolds between 65 and 75 that your doctor has almost certainly never clarified for you. Your muscles develop what researchers term anabolic resistance. They essentially become less receptive to the signals instructing them to rebuild. A study from the University of Texas Medical Branch discovered that adults over 70 require up to 50% more dietary protein per meal to achieve the same muscle-building response as a 30-year-old eating an identical meal. 50% more. Yet the standard dietary guidance handed to older adults is still rooted in recommendations designed for younger populations. Think of anabolic resistance like an aging radio. When you were younger, the signal came through loud and clear with minimal adjustment. After 65, the signal is still broadcasting, but the receiver becomes increasingly difficult to fine-tune. You have to put in greater effort, consume more protein, time it more strategically, and pair it with the appropriate physical stimulus just to obtain the same outcome you once achieved automatically. Here is why this carries such catastrophic weight specifically within the 65 to 75 window. After age 70, the average adult who takes no action to counteract this trend will lose roughly 1 to 2% of their muscle mass annually. That number seems insignificant until you run the math. By age 75, if you started at 65 doing nothing, you could have shed 10 to 15% of your functional muscle. That is the margin between living independently and requiring help with fundamental daily tasks. It is the gap between being able to rise from the floor after a fall and being unable to do so. The clinical term for severe muscle loss is sarcopenia. and a comprehensive review published in the journal Nutrients found that it affects up to 29% of community-dwelling adults over 70 and is directly linked to a nearly threefold increase in fall risk. I think of my patient Margaret, 71, from Savannah, Georgia. She came to me after experiencing her third fall in 2 years. She had been adhering to what she considered a wholesome diet, but when we scrutinized her protein consumption, she was taking in approximately 45 grams per day. Roughly half of what current research suggests is optimal for someone of her age and activity level. We overhauled her nutritional plan to include at least 30 to 35 grams of high-quality protein per meal, timed deliberately after resistance exercise, and we incorporated leucine-rich foods like eggs, fish, and Greek yogurt, specifically because leucine is the amino acid that serves as the direct catalyst for muscle protein synthesis. Within 6 months, Margaret had dropped 11 pounds of fat, gained measurable lean muscle mass, and had not suffered a single fall. At her most recent checkup, she told me she had carried her own groceries from the car for the first time in 3 years. The synergy tip here is essential. Protein by itself is not sufficient after 65. You need to couple your protein intake with resistance training within a 2-hour window to overcome anabolic resistance. Research from McMaster University confirms that the combination of resistance exercise plus adequate leucine-rich protein yields dramatically superior muscle preservation, results in older adults compared to either approach used in isolation. The scientific citations for all of these studies are available in the description box below. The third reason on our list is something I genuinely consider the most overlooked health crisis within the entire senior demographic, and it carries a name that sounds almost too simplistic for how severe it truly is. It is chronic low-grade inflammation. Researchers at Harvard Medical School have coined a term that perfectly encapsulates its nature. They call it inflammaging. The concept is exactly what it sounds like, a slow, silent, smoldering fire of inflammation that accelerates the aging process at the cellular level, and it hits a critical tipping point somewhere in the 65 to 75 range, making this decade uniquely perilous. Here is what is actually occurring inside your body. Your immune system, which was brilliantly engineered to activate when you are battling an infection and then settle back down, begins to lose its off switch as you grow older. Inflammatory signals called cytokines, think of them as alarm bells that your immune system rings when it detects a threat, start firing at low levels almost ceaselessly. A study published in Nature Medicine that tracked inflammatory biomarkers in over 44,000 participants across multiple decades found that chronic elevation of a key inflammatory marker called interleukin-6 was associated with a 63% higher risk of cardiovascular disease, a 42% higher risk of cognitive decline, and a 38% acceleration in overall biological aging. This is not minor background noise. This is the engine driving virtually every major age-related disease: Alzheimer's, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and cancer. And this is precisely where the 65 to 75 window becomes especially treacherous. Before 65, many individuals possess sufficient metabolic reserves and cellular repair capacity to buffer the damage inflicted by inflammaging. After 75, the harm has often already accumulated to the point where management becomes the realistic objective rather than reversal. But between 65 and 75, you are in the sweet spot where intervention is most potent and most capable of producing genuine biological reversal. This is the period where you can actually move the needle. The anti-inflammatory dietary pattern, most robustly supported by scientific evidence, is built around omega-3 fatty acids, polyphenol-rich foods, and the conscious reduction of ultra-processed items. Research from the University of California, San Diego found that seniors who adopted a Mediterranean-style eating pattern showed measurable reductions in interleukin 6 levels within just 12 weeks, accompanied by improvements in cognitive test scores and self-reported energy levels. Fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, extra virgin olive oil, berries, leafy greens, walnuts, and turmeric. These are not passing wellness fads. They are molecularly active interventions with documented anti-inflammatory mechanisms. The synergy tip for combating inflammaging is this: pair your anti-inflammatory diet with consistent moderate intensity aerobic exercise and make sleep a top priority. Research from the University of Birmingham found that regular moderate exercise directly suppresses the overactive cytokine production that drives inflammaging, acting almost like a volume knob that turns down the alarm bells. And sleep is when your glymphatic system, your brain's own waste removal drainage network, runs its nightly cleaning cycle. Interrupting that cycle, as chronic poor sleep does, allows inflammatory debris to accumulate in brain tissue and is now considered one of the strongest modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Now, right here, I want to pause for a moment and ask something of you. If this information is genuinely shifting the way you think about your health right now, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. I upload fresh content every single week, specifically designed for people in the 60 to 80 age range, evidence-based and actionable, because you deserve information that respects your intelligence and treats you as the capable adult you are. Hit subscribe so you never miss an update. Now, let us continue. The second reason on our list is the one I promised you at the beginning of this video: the silent crisis unfolding inside your cells that almost no physician ever brings up with their aging patients. And it may very well be the single most important concept in all of biology when it comes to understanding why the 65 to 75 window is so uniquely grueling. It is the breakdown of mitochondrial function. Your mitochondria are the energy-generating organelles housed within nearly every cell in your body. Think of them as tiny power stations. They take in oxygen and nutrients and transform them into the cellular fuel that powers every biological process you have, from contracting a muscle to firing a neuron to repairing damaged DNA. A young, healthy individual possesses dense, efficient, well-maintained mitochondria that produce energy abundantly and clean up their own waste products through a process called mitophagy, essentially cellular housekeeping. But between the ages of 65 and 75, mitochondrial function typically undergoes what researchers at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging describe as a functional cliff, a period of accelerated decline that is qualitatively different from the gradual erosion of earlier decades. A study published in Cell Metabolism found that adults between 65 and 75 showed up to a 35% reduction in mitochondrial oxidative capacity, meaning their cellular power plants were operating at roughly 65% of optimal efficiency. And here is the cascade that this triggers. When mitochondria produce energy inefficiently, they also generate more toxic byproducts called reactive oxygen species. Think of these as the exhaust fumes from a poorly tuned engine. Those reactive oxygen species damage DNA, accelerate cellular aging, fuel the inflammaging process we discussed, and impair the brain's ability to form and consolidate memories. The fatigue that so many people in their late 60s describe, that deep cellular exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to remedy, is very often mitochondrial dysfunction expressing itself. This is precisely why this decade matters so profoundly. Mitochondria retain extraordinary plasticity. Their ability to respond and adapt throughout the 65 to 75 window. But after 80, that plasticity diminishes significantly, and the window for meaningful mitochondrial restoration becomes much narrower. You have a genuine biological opportunity right now that you will not have indefinitely. The most powerfully evidence-based strategy for mitochondrial restoration in older adults combines three elements. First, high-intensity interval training, short bursts of intense effort followed by recovery periods. A landmark study from the Mayo Clinic found that HIIT produced a 49% increase in mitochondrial capacity in adults over 65, dramatically outperforming continuous moderate exercise. Second, time-restricted eating. Confining your eating to an 8 to 10 hour window each day has been shown by researchers at the Salk Institute to activate autophagy, the cellular cleaning process that removes damaged mitochondrial components and allows fresh, efficient ones to grow in their place. Third, specific micronutrients serve as essential cofactors for mitochondrial function. Coenzyme Q10, magnesium, B vitamins, and the increasingly researched compound NMN, which supports the production of NAD+, the master molecule that mitochondria require to generate energy efficiently. I want to tell you about a patient named Robert, 69, from Portland, Oregon. Robert came to me reporting what he described as whole-body exhaustion. He was sleeping 8 hours and waking up tired, struggling to walk his dog without needing to rest, and had quietly abandoned most of the hobbies he once loved. His conventional blood work was essentially normal, which had led multiple physicians to attribute his symptoms to aging and suggest antidepressants. We ran a more comprehensive metabolic assessment and found clear markers of mitochondrial insufficiency. We implemented a 12-week protocol built around progressive HIIT 3 times per week, a 10-hour eating window, and targeted mitochondrial support supplementation. At the end of 12 weeks, Robert's energy scores had improved by 61%. He was hiking 4 miles on weekends, and he told me he felt more like himself than he had in nearly a decade. Robert was not sick. Robert was operating in a body that needed a specific kind of support that no one had ever offered him. The synergy tip for mitochondrial health is to combine your exercise protocol with cold exposure. Even something as accessible as ending your shower with 2 minutes of cold water. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that cold exposure directly stimulates the production of new mitochondria through a pathway called PGC1 alpha activation, essentially signaling your body to build more and better cellular power plants. And now we arrive at number 1, the hardest, most invisible, and most consequential challenge of the 65 to 75 decade. This one encompasses every other item on our list and adds a dimension that science is only recently beginning to fully quantify. It is the collapse of what researchers call biological resilience, and understanding it will fundamentally change how you think about every health decision you make from this day forward. Biological resilience is your body's capacity to recover from stress. Not emotional stress, though that matters too, but physiological stress of every kind: illness, injury, disrupted sleep, nutritional gaps, the ordinary physical demands of living. When you were 35, if you got sick, you bounced back in 3 days. If you pulled a muscle, it healed in 2 weeks. If you had a terrible week of poor sleep, one good night restored you substantially. Your body was a system with enormous reserve capacity. It could absorb significant disruption and spring back to baseline almost automatically. Between 65 and 75, that reserve capacity undergoes its most precipitous documented decline. A comprehensive analysis published in the journal Aging Cell, drawing data from the English longitudinal study of aging with over 10,000 participants, found that adults in the 65 to 75 age window showed a 47% reduction in measured resilience biomarkers compared to adults in their early 60s, 47%. And critically, the researchers found that this decline was not linear. It happened in a compressed window, meaning the loss is accumulated faster during this decade than any other. Think of biological resilience like the suspension system on a car. When it is working well, you can hit potholes and bumps, and the car absorbs them smoothly. When the suspension begins to fail, every bump becomes a jarring, damaging event. For aging adults with diminished biological resilience, what would once have been a minor health disruption, a urinary tract infection, a week of reduced appetite after a stressful event, a brief illness requiring bed rest, can cascade into a serious and lasting functional decline. Physicians call this decompensation, and it is responsible for an enormous proportion of the accelerated aging that people observe in their late 60s and 70s.